Tonight, we uncover a secret so powerful it was never meant to be touched. A legacy hidden in plain sight, not buried in sand or stone, but encoded in faith, architecture, and ritual. For centuries, the Knights Templar were celebrated as warriors and protectors. Yet behind the image of swords and shields lies something far older, a force they guarded in silence, a frequency that could bend minds, heal bodies, and awaken what should have remained dormant. This isn't just about gold, relics, or sacred scrolls. It's about a device older than kings, a covenant of ethics and resonance, and those who tried to claim it for power met with whispers, shadows, and vanishing. The truth vibrates beneath chapels, through crypts, and along ley lines, waiting for those who understand its song. From Jerusalem to Chartres, from Montségur to Rosslyn, from whispered chants to coded lullabies, the Ark was never simply an artifact. It was a field, a living instrument, and the Templars its first custodians. Every chapel, every stone, every symbol left behind was part of a map, a manual, a warning. So before you dismiss this as legend or fantasy, ask yourself, what if the power of the Ark still exists, still hums, still waits to be tuned by those who know how to listen? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we step into a world where faith becomes frequency, and the Ark of the Covenant is not just history, it is a hidden power. Beneath the ruins of an old chapel in Jerusalem, the air vibrates with something you cannot see. It is not the wind, not the shifting of ancient stones, but a hum so low it feels alive. Locals say it comes from the ground itself, a pulse that grows stronger at night when the stars align over the Temple Mount. They whisper that this is where the Knights Templar began to hear it, a sound older than any king, older even than the faith they served. It began as a rumour, a strange echo that followed them through prayer, through battle, through silence. Some said it was the voice of God, others said it was the Ark. When 9 knights took their vows in the year 1119, few understood what they were truly after. Officially, their mission was simple, to protect pilgrims on the road to the Holy Land. But they chose their home not near the roads, not near the markets, but directly above the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. It was a strange choice for warriors, a place of stone and shadow, of sealed tunnels and buried rooms. For years they stayed there, digging quietly at night while the city slept. No one knew what they searched for, no treasure was shown. But when they emerged, something in them had changed. Their eyes seemed to hold a secret. Their prayers carried a rhythm like a chant that had been learned, not taught. By the time they returned to Europe, the world treated them as holy men. Kings trusted them, popes blessed them, armies feared them. Their order spread like fire across Christendom. But behind the banners and swords, their true power was not money or fame. It was what they had found under that stone. Witnesses who entered their chapels spoke of a strange vibration in the walls. Choirs that sang inside described notes that seemed to echo even after their voices stopped. Some called it a miracle, some called it dangerous. The Templars built their churches with uncanny precision. Each wall matched the geometry of the old temple, each chamber placed at a perfect angle to the Earth's magnetic lines. Some of these buildings still stand today, and if you stand in the center and hum softly, the sound will circle back to you, deep and endless. Modern engineers would call it resonance. The Templars called it presence. They believed that certain places could act as instruments, tuning the air between heaven and earth. One surviving letter from a Templar master speaks of the golden measure, a perfect tone said to open the heart of the world. It was not music, but power in harmony. Some believed it was what Moses heard from the Ark of the Covenant, the sound of creation itself captured in a box of wood and gold. If that was true, then the Templars had not just found a relic. They had found a frequency, a voice that could not be silenced, only hidden beneath stone, until the world was ready to hear it again. The parchment was blackened at the edges, curled like dried leaves, the ink barely visible except where the fire had licked it clean. It was found hidden inside a cracked reliquary in a forgotten chapel near Acre. At first glance, it looked like an old trade map, lines crossing from Jerusalem to the French coast, marked with small circles that could have been towns or forts. But when scholars laid it flat and traced the lines, they saw something strange. The routes did not follow rivers or roads. They cut across mountains, deserts, and seas in perfect alignment, forming angles that matched the constellations above. It was not a map of travel, it was a map of power. The Templars were not only warriors, they were mathematicians, builders, and astronomers. They believed that divine truth was written not only in scripture, but in geometry. To them, every distance held meaning, every angle a purpose. When they discovered that certain places on Earth echoed with the same strange hum they had heard beneath the Temple Mount, they began marking those sites. The burned vellum was one of their tools, a secret chart connecting these locations. Jerusalem, Acre, Chartres, and others, yet unknown, formed a network that mirrored the stars in the belt of Orion. Some modern researchers call these ley lines, but to the Templars they were more sacred than roads. They were channels, lines that carried something invisible yet powerful across the earth. In Jerusalem, the vibration was strongest under the mount. In Acre, it hummed faintly beneath the fortress floor. At Chartres Cathedral, it resonated through the stained glass and into the bones of anyone who stood at the centre of the labyrinth. The same sound, the same frequency, the same hidden presence that the knights had sworn to protect. The map was never meant to lead someone to a destination. It was meant to tune the world, to keep the energy balanced between heaven and earth, between creation and silence. Those who studied the lines in later centuries noticed that many Templar churches stood on ancient pagan sites, places once used for rituals long before Christianity. Instead of erasing those locations, the Templars built upon them, layering new symbols over old ones, as if continuing a song that had never ended. Each point on the map was a note, each fortress a chord. When seen together, they formed a kind of symphony across continents. The burned vellum showed not routes of conquest, but lines of resonance. It is said that when the map was first drawn, the ink was mixed with powdered gold and ash from a temple candle taken from Jerusalem. That is why the fire could not fully destroy it. Even now, the faint lines glow under certain light, as though still alive, still pulsing. Some believe that the Ark of the Covenant, wherever it rests, draws strength from these alignments, feeding on the silent energy that moves through stone and soil. The map was a circuit, and the Templars were its guardians. Each fortress they built, each cathedral they raised, was another connection in a network meant not for war, but for harmony. And, somewhere beneath the ashes of time, that map still waits to be read again. The night was heavy with silence, when the 9 knights took their vows. It was the year 1119, and the moon hung low over Jerusalem like a polished coin. Inside the dim hall of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, they knelt before the Patriarch, swearing oaths not to kings or crowns, but to something higher. They called themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, humble guardians of pilgrims, yet their eyes told a different story. Each man seemed to carry the weight of a secret already known. When the ceremony ended, they rose as brothers of a new order. By dawn, they rode toward the Temple Mount. The mount was quiet, its stones scarred by centuries of conquest. Beneath it, tunnels stretched deep into the earth, remnants of the first temple built by Solomon. It was here that the knights chose to make their home, a decision that puzzled even their allies. Why would warriors live underground beneath a ruin? But that was their purpose. For 9 years, the knights dug in secret. They did not mine for riches or relics of gold. They sought something unseen, a sound that had haunted their prayers since their arrival in the Holy Land. They followed whispers in the walls, faint vibrations that grew stronger the deeper they went. Old scrolls spoke of a sacred chest that once rested in the Holy of Holies, a vessel said to contain the presence of God. Many believed it had been lost when the temple was destroyed, but the knights believed otherwise. They followed the echo, believing the ark had never truly vanished, that its energy had sunk into the very stones beneath Jerusalem. They worked in silence, their torches flickering against damp walls, their picks ringing like small bells in the dark. Some nights, the sound grew louder. A low hum filled the tunnels, making the air feel alive. The men would stop digging, standing motionless as the vibration passed through them, shaking their hearts like a hidden drum. One record from a later century described what they found. It spoke of a sealed chamber carved with symbols older than Hebrew, older than Egypt, glowing faintly when touched by flame. In the center stood a stone platform, with markings that resembled a musical scale. The knights believed this was the resting place of the ark, or at least of its echo, the residue of divine frequency. They prayed there, not knowing whether they were worshipping or listening. When they finally emerged, something in them had changed. Their silence was deeper, their gaze sharper. They spoke rarely of what they had seen, only saying that beneath the mount, the veil between heaven and earth was thin enough to hear. In the years that followed, their order grew powerful beyond reason, as if they carried that vibration within them. The world saw soldiers, the church saw saints, but the truth lay underground, in a dark chamber where stone still remembers the sound of creation, and 9 men once stood trembling before a voice that did not speak but sang. For thousands of years, the Ark of the Covenant has been described as a sacred chest, a box of acacia wood lined with gold and crowned by angels. But what if that was never the whole truth? What if the Ark was not simply a container for divine law, but a device, a kind of ancient technology built to hold a force the world was not ready to understand? Imagine something that glowed without flame, that hummed softly when approached, that changed those who touched it. Scripture tells us that the ark could level walls, part rivers, and strike men dead for simply looking inside. To most, these are miracles, but to the Templars, they were evidence of something else, something that obeyed laws older than faith. When the Templars uncovered fragments beneath the Temple Mount, they began to suspect that the ark had not been lost, only hidden in pieces. They found gold panels scorched at the edges, traces of resin hardened like glass, and symbols etched in geometric spirals. These were not decorations. They were patterns meant to channel energy. The ark, they believed, was designed to contain an anomalous field, a kind of living current that hummed between its golden layers. The description in Exodus, 2 cherubim facing each other with wings touching above a space called the mercy seat, fit perfectly with what modern engineers might call a conductor, 2 opposing poles focusing a single charge. The presence of God, as the ancients described it, might have been the radiant field that gathered between them. Stories from the Old Testament take on new meaning under this light. When Uzzah reached out to steady the ark and was struck dead, it was not punishment but reaction. The human body could not withstand direct contact with the charge. When the Israelites carried the ark into battle, the sound it emitted terrified their enemies before a single sword was raised. The walls of Jericho did not fall from horns alone, but from resonance, a frequency unleashed when the ark was brought close. The Templars saw the pattern. They realized that whoever controlled the ark did not just command faith. They commanded the invisible power woven into creation itself. Those who handled the recovered fragments claimed strange visions. Their hearts beat faster, their dreams filled with symbols of light and fire. Some reported hearing voices in tones too deep to belong to any human throat. One knight, described in a later account, was found kneeling in prayer, his hair turned white overnight. He said he had seen the beginning of the world. The Templars began to believe that the ark was never meant to be a weapon. It was a bridge, a way to hear what ancient priests called the word, not speech, but vibration, the same sound that had once moved across the waters in the first moment of creation. The ark was not lost. It was misunderstood, hidden because mankind had forgotten how to listen without being destroyed by what they heard. The candlelight trembled as the initiate entered the chamber. He had been told this was no ordinary lesson. Before him sat an old scholar of the priory, his face half hidden beneath a hood, a single brass instrument resting on the table between them. It looked like a tuning fork, but older, carved with symbols that spiraled inward until they vanished into a single point. The scholar tapped it lightly, and the air seemed to shimmer. A low hum filled the room, soft yet deep enough to shake the bones. The initiate felt his heartbeat fall into rhythm with it. Then the scholar spoke. He said this was the sound of the divine, the frequency of God. Not a metaphor, but an actual vibration, one that the ancients had learned to measure, preserve, and even build into the Ark of the Covenant itself. The initiate had always imagined glory as light, something bright and blinding. But the scholar explained that light was only part of the truth. Every ray, every note, every breath of creation carried harmonics. Glory, he said, was resonance. It was the voice of God stretched into matter. When prophets described hearing the word of the Lord, they were not hearing speech. They were hearing tone, a perfect tone, one that could shake walls or heal wounds, one that could make stone feel alive. The ark had been designed to contain that tone safely. Its golden layers, perfectly measured, acted like the plates of a capacitor, storing and releasing energy in rhythm. The space between the cherubim, called the mercy seat, was more than a resting place for divinity. It was the focal point of the resonance, the meeting of two poles that created a field strong enough to thin the veil between worlds. The scholar turned the tuning fork again, and this time the sound seemed to bloom outward. The candle flame stretched, its edges vibrating. The initiate saw the air ripple as though reality itself were breathing. He wanted to look away, but curiosity anchored him. The scholar whispered that this was only a faint echo of the true frequency. He said that, when the ark was active, it produced a tone so pure that the human mind mistook it for light. The veil between heaven and earth grew thin enough for a man to see what lay beyond, though few could bear it for long. That was why the high priest entered the Holy of Holies only once a year, and why he wore bells on his robe. If the sound stopped, it meant he had not survived the resonance. The initiate asked if the tone could be recreated. The scholar smiled sadly. He said the Templars had tried, using geometry, sound, and even human voice, but they never achieved the original harmony. Still, some had come close. Those who did described an overwhelming sense of unity, as if every particle of existence was singing the same note. The scholar said that was the true meaning of glory, not a blinding light from above, but the vibration that binds everything together, the tone that keeps the universe from falling into silence. And when he spoke that final word, the hum faded, leaving only the echo of creation lingering in the stillness. The oath was taken in silence. No banners, no fanfare, no royal witnesses, only torchlight flickering across the faces of men who knew what they were about to swear would change the course of history. The Templars had uncovered fragments of something ancient beneath the Temple Mount, something that was never meant to be owned, and so the covenant was rewritten, not as a promise between God and a chosen people, but as a contract of guardianship between humankind and creation itself. The ark was no longer the object of devotion. It was the vessel of a force too vast to belong to anyone. The knights understood that their duty was not to possess it, but to protect the field it generated, the living pulse that threaded through earth and sky. They were not owners. They were custodians. It was said that the Grand Master at the time gathered the brothers in a circular chamber deep beneath Jerusalem. There, surrounded by stone, carved with both crosses and stars, he told them the truth of what they had found. He spoke of a resonance that could heal or destroy, depending on intention. He warned that kings and popes alike would do anything to control it, to turn divine energy into power. He told them that the real ark was not the chest, but the current within it, and that current was still alive, moving invisibly through certain places on earth. To guard those places was to guard the balance of the world. The brothers knelt as he drew a line across the floor with a blade, dividing light from shadow. Those who stepped across it entered a vow of silence that would last until death. From that night forward, their mission changed. Publicly, they remained soldiers and bankers of Christendom, defenders of pilgrims and builders of fortresses. But beneath the surface, their secret order moved differently. Every Templar preceptory built after that followed hidden measurements tied to the geometry of the field. Chapels stood on intersections of energy. Wells were dug where the hum of the earth was strongest. To the untrained eye, it looked like coincidence. To them, it was protection. They believed that as long as those sites remained active, the divine frequency would stay stable, preventing what one manuscript called the collapse of harmony. Secrecy became survival. The knights learned early that power draws envy faster than faith. Word of their discoveries spread in whispers through courts and monasteries. Some claimed they had found the voice of God. Others said they had stolen it. The church demanded answers, but the brothers gave none. They had already seen what happened when men tried to weaponize holiness. Armies marched under crosses, blood spilled in the name of salvation, and kingdoms rose on the ruins of faith. The Templars would not let that happen again. The covenant they made that night was simple but absolute. Protect the field, guard the tone, preserve the balance between heaven and earth, even if history forgets your name. And as centuries passed, it did forget. Their castles crumbled, their leaders burned, and their order was erased from record. But the field they swore to defend still hums beneath cathedrals, under mountains, and within silence itself. The covenant remains unbroken. They began to appear quietly, scattered across Europe, like stones dropped into a pond, each sending ripples no one could see. From Portugal to Scotland, from the plains of France to the hills of Germany, the Templars built their commanderies. To the outside world, they were fortresses, garrisons meant to protect pilgrims and guard treasure. But to those who knew the true covenant, they were something else entirely. Each fortress was a note in a hidden song, each chapel an instrument designed to catch the same vibration first heard beneath the Temple Mount. Together, they formed a network across the continent, a road of silent fortresses humming with the same invisible rhythm. No builder could explain how the Templars managed such precision. Their sites were not random. When traced on a map, their locations formed perfect geometric patterns. Triangles, hexagons, and even pentagrams stretched across thousands of miles, their angles too exact to be chance. Chartres, Tomar, Laon, Rosslyn, and dozens of smaller outposts, all aligned as though connected by an unseen compass. Some modern researchers have called it coincidence, others obsession. But to those who have stood in the ruins at dawn, when light breaks through the eastern windows just so, there is no doubt. The stones still hum. The knights built their chapels with a care that bordered on ritual. The proportions of the walls followed sacred ratios. The vaults curved like the inside of a shell. Even the placement of windows mattered. When sunlight poured through the coloured glass, it struck exact points on the floor at precise times of the year, amplifying what they called the breath of God. Locals believed the Templars prayed at odd hours, but in truth they were listening. Some chronicles describe how the brothers would gather at midnight, extinguish every torch, and wait in silence. When the wind passed through the arches, a low tone filled the hall, resonating like a living voice. The design of their fortresses was no less deliberate. Each was anchored to a natural energy point, chosen not for strategy, but for alignment. The deep wells, the circular courtyards, the spiral staircases all served as channels, drawing and stabilizing the same field that once radiated from the ark. Their walls were built thick, not to keep enemies out, but to hold the vibration in. It is said that certain commanderies could transmit the hum from one site to another through the ground itself, forming a chain of resonance across Europe. The Templars had turned the continent into a vast instrument, tuned to the same note that once shook the stones of Jerusalem. When the order fell centuries later, many of these sites were abandoned or repurposed by the church. Monks prayed where knights once listened. Choirs sang where frequencies once pulsed. Yet even now, travellers who visit those places speak of strange sensations. Some hear faint echoes in the walls. Others feel warmth under the stone floors, as if something alive still moves beneath. The fortresses remain silent, but their silence is not empty. It is the pause between notes in a song the world has forgotten how to play. Across the centuries, the Templars left behind no written record of their true mission, yet their symbols covered Europe like constellations carved into stone. To those who knew how to read them, each mark was a message, a direction, or a key. Among these signs, one rose above all others, the Queen of Signs, the bee. Small, harmless, and often overlooked, the bee became the quiet emblem of sacred order. It appeared carved on lintels, stitched into robes, etched onto chalices. To ordinary believers, it was a symbol of work and devotion. To the initiated, it marked a safe passage, a corridor where the field remained stable and unbroken. Wherever bees were carved in groups of 3 or 7, it meant that the site still hummed with the old vibration, still connected to the network first mapped in the Holy Land. Alongside the bee came the 8-pointed star, the mark of balance. Its design, 2 overlapping squares, represented heaven and earth perfectly aligned. When placed on chapel walls, it indicated not just sanctity, but calibration. These were the points where sound and geometry met in perfect harmony, where the hum could be felt strongest beneath the stone. The Templars used these stars to trace the energy lines that crisscrossed their commanderies. Later, Masons and pilgrims copied them, unaware that they were walking the same sacred grid. The 8 points also carried another meaning: renewal through resonance. When a site grew weak, when its tone drifted from balance, the brothers gathered to sing the old chants, each note aligning with a point of the star, recharging the field like tuning an instrument. Then came the most enigmatic of their symbols, the Black Madonna. Statues of her appeared suddenly across Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries, dark-skinned, solemn, holding the child not as a saint but as a secret. The Church claimed she represented the Virgin of Humility, but in truth she was something older. To the Templars and their successors, she symbolized the vessel, the human body, as container of divine frequency. Her color was not meant to show suffering or sorrow, but the fertile void, the hidden field from which all resonance was born. In every region where the Black Madonna appeared, from Chartres to Montserrat, the surrounding land aligned with the ancient grid. Beneath each statue lay a spring or a cavern, places where the hum of the earth was strong enough to hear. The faithful who carried these symbols in secret knew they were more than decoration. They were manuals for maintaining the field. The bee showed where energy flowed, the star showed where it gathered. The Madonna marked where it could be reborn. Together, they formed a living code, a language that only the initiated could interpret. Even after the Templars were gone, the symbols persisted. Painters hid bees in the corners of religious art. Architects carved 8-pointed stars into cathedrals. Pilgrims prayed before dark-faced Madonnas, without knowing they were standing on ancient instruments, still humming beneath their feet. The Queen of Signs ruled quietly, her meaning disguised as devotion, her message preserved not in words, but in pattern, guiding those who still remembered how to listen. The story survives in fragments, whispered through monasteries, and buried in coded notes. It tells of a night experiment that should never have happened, yet did deep beneath a Templar fortress somewhere in southern France. The brothers had recovered what they believed to be part of the ark's inner lining, a gold plate scorched but intact, humming faintly when exposed to air. For years they had guarded it without daring to test its power. But one winter night, when a fellow knight lay dying from fever, the Grand Master gave in to curiosity, or perhaps desperation. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin already cold. The chapel below the fortress was cleared, and the relic was brought from its vault, covered in linen and fear. The chamber was lit by candles, though even their flames seemed uneasy. The brothers placed the relic at the foot of the altar, still wrapped, and laid the dying man nearby. The hum began almost immediately, soft at first, then rising until the candles leaned toward it as if drawn by wind. The air thickened. The knight's pulse, once erratic, began to slow and steady. His chest lifted with a deep, unexpected breath. Those who stood closest swore they felt their own hearts sink to the same rhythm. The hum was no longer just sound. It was alive, filling every stone and shadow in the room. When one of the brothers touched the linen, a spark leapt from it, sharp enough to leave a scar. The Grand Master ordered them all to step back. For a moment, it seemed as if a miracle had occurred. The dying man opened his eyes. His lips moved, though no words came. A golden light flickered beneath the cloth, faint but real. The air smelled of metal and rain. Then, as quickly as it began, the hum faded. The knight slept peacefully until dawn. When the brothers checked him hours later, his fever was gone. He lived another 7 years. They buried him under the chapel, his tomb marked only with a single B. By morning, the Grand Master declared the experiment forbidden. He said the relic was not meant to be used, only protected. The knights swore on their swords never to test it again. But curiosity is a stubborn shadow. Weeks later, another attempt was made, this time in secret. The second test ended differently. The relic flared with light so bright it burned the wall behind it. One man collapsed instantly, the others fled, terrified by what they had awakened. The survivors sealed the chamber, swearing that no one would open it again. Still, the story spread quietly. Some claimed the relic could heal, others said it drained life to restore it elsewhere. The Templars called it the breath of God, a force neither holy nor evil but exact, a power that gave only what was asked with absolute precision. And that was the danger. It answered intention, not prayer. The knights never fully understood it, yet they kept it close, bound by fear and faith, knowing they had touched something older than mercy, older even than death itself. The demand came wrapped in velvet and sealed with a crown. The King of France, restless with ambition and rumours of divine weapons, summoned the Templars to his court. Word had reached him of a relic that could strike armies silent and heal the dying. He called it the Thunder of God. The knights knew he meant the Ark, or rather, what they had made of it, a fragment of its core encased within layers of gold and secrecy. They had sworn never to use it for war, but kings rarely asked, they commanded. The Grand Master rode to the palace under the pretense of loyalty, carrying a chest that looked ancient and heavy. Inside, however, there was only stone, carved to mimic the original. The real core had been moved days earlier, hidden in a fortress far to the south, where even the king's spies could not reach. The meeting took place at night. The king's hall glowed with hundreds of candles, their reflections dancing on polished armour. He demanded a demonstration. The Grand Master hesitated, claiming the relic's power could not be summoned on command. The king insisted. So the Templars prepared a scene. They carried the decoy into the courtyard and placed it on a marble pedestal. Trumpets sounded. Courtiers leaned forward, expecting lightning. The Grand Master began to chant in Latin, his voice low and steady. He raised his hand, and for a brief moment something stirred, a vibration so faint it could have been imagination. But no light appeared, no hum, no thunder. The air remained still. The king frowned. The Grand Master lowered his head, whispering that perhaps faith had grown too thin for the divine to answer. The king dismissed him with anger and humiliation. He called the relic a fraud and accused the Templars of deceit. The Grand Master bowed deeply, hiding the small smile that touched his lips. The failure had worked perfectly. That night, the decoy was left behind in the palace vault, guarded as a trophy. The true core continued its journey through secret roads and cloisters, carried by monks sworn to silence. They called it the Heart of the Storm. It was said that when the real vessel was moved, the sky above turned grey, and the wind shifted as if the earth itself were aware of its absence. Years later, when the same king turned against the Templars and ordered their arrest, he demanded again to see the device. The vault was opened, but only the empty decoy remained. The stone was cold, the gold dull. The hum that once filled the halls of the faithful was gone. He struck the box in anger, declaring it superstition. He did not know that the real relic had been divided again, its pieces hidden in chapels and mountains, each placed on the sacred lines that once connected Jerusalem to Chartres. The Templars had learned their lesson well. Power could not be trusted to crowns. The thunder belonged to no man, and so they silenced it, hiding its heart where no empire could hear it sing again. It was the last night before the fall. The order had been betrayed, its secrets sold, and its brothers hunted by the very crown they once served. The Grand Master knew that by sunrise the king's soldiers would come for them, and with them the inquisitors who would stop at nothing to seize what they called the Thunderbox. There was only one way to keep it safe. The Ark had to be divided, not destroyed, for such a thing was impossible, but separated, scattered, so that no single hand could ever wield it again. And so, under the dim light of a waning moon, the Templars performed the most solemn rite in their history. They gathered in the crypt of their fortress, the relic placed at the centre of a circle marked in ash and salt. The air trembled with quiet power. The brothers removed their gloves and armour, entering barefoot to remind themselves that this was no act of war, but of preservation. One by one, they disassembled the Ark. The outer shell, the golden chest itself, was entrusted to the Knights of Portugal, who would sail west under the banner of a red cross and vanish into the mist. The staves, the rods said to carry the field safely, were given to the guardians of Scotland, hidden in abbeys where geometry still whispered the old harmonies. The lid, the mercy seat where the light once gathered, went east toward the Holy Land again, carried by monks disguised as traders. And the inner matrix, the living core that pulsed with unseen energy, remained in France under the watch of those who had sworn the oldest vow. Each group performed a rite before departure. The Portuguese brothers anointed their ship with oil and wine, asking the sea to keep their burden hidden. The Scots sang the ancient chant of 7 tones, sealing their cargo with vibration. The Eastern monks buried fragments of scripture along their path, mapping their journey in sacred verse. The French knights, last to leave, carved a symbol into the stone floor of the crypt, an 8-pointed star intersected by a bee. It was both warning and promise. Should the day come when the pieces must be rejoined, the star would guide the way. When the dawn broke, the fortress was empty. The soldiers who arrived found only ashes and silence. The king's men searched every hall, every vault, but the relic was gone. They found traces of gold dust in the crypt, the faint scent of myrrh, and the strange impression of wings burned into the stone. None could explain it. The trails that began that night would stretch across centuries. Some say the shell reached Tomar and was buried beneath the convent of Christ. Others whisper the staves were sealed under Rosslyn Chapel. The lid, they claim, rests in the caves beneath Jerusalem once more. And the matrix, the heart of the Ark, sleeps somewhere beneath the soil of France, its hum faint but unbroken. The world forgot the night of the split, but the earth did not. It still remembers the rhythm of 4 trails departing under moonlight, carrying the last breath of an ancient covenant. It was found in the ruins of a priory near Limoges, a small book bound in dark leather and clasped with silver. The pages were thick, untouched by ink or age, perfectly blank. To the monks who discovered it, it looked like nothing more than a forgotten notebook, yet no one dared to discard it. Something about the weight of it felt wrong, or perhaps too right. It seemed to hum faintly when held near flame, a sound not of paper but of resonance. They stored it in a chest and left it untouched for centuries, until a scholar of the priory brought it to light once more. He called it the Book with No Ink. At first he saw nothing, but when he pressed gently on the pages, he felt the grooves beneath his fingertips. Invisible writing carved not by pen but by pressure. Under the glow of candlelight, faint patterns emerged, not words but lines and arcs. He heated the page near the flame, and the air around him seemed to shimmer. Then, softly, he began to chant. It was a tone he had learned from an older brother, a single sustained note said to mimic the hum of the ark itself. As his voice filled the chamber, something impossible happened. The blank pages bloomed, diagrams rose from the fibres like breath on glass, circles within circles, ratios that mirrored the human body, and at the centre of every pattern, a small mark shaped like a bee. The book was not meant to be read by sight, but by sound. The Templars who made it had encoded their knowledge in vibration, knowing that the written word could be destroyed, but resonance could not. Each page responded to a specific frequency, revealing diagrams only when sung correctly. Some described the structure of their fortresses, others showed alignments of stars and sacred sites. A few, the scholar claimed, depicted instructions for harmonizing the separated pieces of the ark. He realized the pages acted like tuning forks. Heat awakened the fibers, pressure mapped their structure, and tone brought them to life. It was scripture made of science and faith woven together. But the more he studied it, the more the book began to change him. At night, he heard faint music in his dreams, the same note echoing through stone corridors. When he awoke, his pulse matched its rhythm. He warned that the book was not just knowledge, it was alive. The tone that revealed it also awakened something dormant in those who heard it. Some monks who listened too long fell ill with fever, or visions of light moving behind their eyes. The scholar sealed the book again, fearing what might happen if the chant reached unprepared ears. Still, rumours spread. Copies were attempted, but all failed. The secret lay not in the parchment or the heat, but in the sound, the exact frequency known only to those who had touched the true field. The book with no ink remains hidden, locked behind stone and silence, waiting for a voice pure enough to awaken it once more. They say when that voice is found, the diagrams will sing again, and the forgotten geometry of heaven will bloom upon its pages. The fortress of Montségur stood like a crown of stone above the Pyrenees, its walls glowing red under the torchlight of siege. The year was 1244, and the last of the Cathars were cornered, accused of heresy, their faith declared poisoned by the church. Below the cliffs, crusader fires roared, swallowing the night. Inside, a handful of believers guarded something far older than doctrine. They called it the Ember, a bundle wrapped in wool and sealed with wax. It was not gold or scripture. It was a fragment of the Templar science, a set of small stones carved with spirals and etched with symbols that sang when struck together. They were calibration stones, instruments used to tune the field once generated by the ark's matrix. The Cathars had become their final keepers. As the fires grew closer, 4 men slipped down the back of the mountain, moving like shadows. The bundle was tied to a rope and lowered slowly, vanishing into the mist. The wind was sharp, carrying the smell of burning cedar and flesh. One of the men whispered a prayer, not to saints or angels, but to the divine pattern itself, asking it to remember them. When the bundle touched the earth below, it let out a faint sound, a low hum that seemed to echo through the rocks. It was not loud, but alive, like bees vibrating in the heart of winter, waiting for spring. Those who carried it fled into the forest, guided by starlight and silence. Behind them, Montségur burned. Witnesses later claimed that as the final cathars walked into the flames, they sang, their voices rising in harmony. The Crusaders heard it and thought it madness, but some said the melody made the air tremble. That was the Song of the Ember, the tone used to seal the stones before they were hidden. It was meant to preserve their frequency so that when the time came, the field could be restored. The refugees who escaped carried the stones across valleys and rivers, passing them from one guardian to another. Some reached Languedoc, others crossed into Aragon. The stones were small enough to fit in a palm but heavy as lead, their surfaces warm even in snow. Centuries later, a farmer near the same mountain found one buried under a fig tree. When he struck it with his plough, it sang for a heartbeat, then went silent again. He sold it to a trader who thought it nothing more than a curious relic. Its twin still lies somewhere in the soil, humming quietly when the wind moves through the gorge. The church recorded Montségur as the end of heresy, the fire that purified the land. But what truly burned there was not belief, it was knowledge. The ember was never found by the inquisitors. Its hum faded from memory, but not from the earth. Some say that on cold nights, when the mountains freeze and the air is still, you can hear it again, a soft vibration under the snow, like the breath of a secret too patient to die. The dawn of Friday the 13th in the year 1307 began with the sound of iron on wood. In every city across France, the same command echoed: arrest the Templars. The knights were taken from their beds, dragged from chapels, chained, and accused of heresy. The king demanded confessions, and the church, bound by politics and fear, obliged. What followed became one of the darkest performances of obedience in history. Under torture, the brothers admitted to anything. They said they spat on the cross, worshipped false idols, kissed the devil's face. They confessed to lies written for them by men who sought their gold. But through all the blood and screams, one truth remained untold. None spoke of the ark, none dared. The king wanted treasure and power, but what he feared most was mystery. He had heard the whispers of relics that glowed and objects that sang, of nights where stone walls trembled at the sound of prayer. He demanded the Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, reveal their secrets. In the dark cell of the temple prison, the Grand Master was beaten and broken, but he said nothing of the field. He knew that to speak it aloud would doom the balance they had sworn to protect. Instead, he confessed to sin, to error, to pride. He gave the king everything he asked for, except the one thing that mattered. Far away in Avignon, Pope Clement received his own report, written not by inquisitors but by priests who still held faith in the Old Covenant. In private, he read the truth. The Templars were guilty only of knowing too much. The relic they guarded was no idol, but a fragment of divine architecture, something that predated even the church itself. Clement was terrified. He absolved the order in secret, sealing the document under his ring. But he did not stop the fire. He could not. The king demanded spectacle, and the people demanded proof that heaven was still under royal control. On March the 18th, 1314, the Grand Master was led to the stake on an island in the Seine. The crowd gathered, the river reflecting the flames like molten gold. As the ropes tightened, he looked toward the cathedral and spoke his last words. "God knows who is wrong," he said, "and time will show." Then the fire took him. Witnesses swore that as he burned, he did not scream, he prayed, and for a moment the air around him shimmered as though vibrating to an unseen note. That night, across the remnants of their commanderies, the Templar altars went still. The resonance that had once hummed through the stones ceased. The ark, wherever its fragments rested, went quiet, as if mourning the death of its last true keeper. The king believed he had silenced a heresy. The Pope thought he had averted a war. Neither realized what had truly been extinguished. Not rebellion, but harmony. The field that once connected heaven and earth fell into sleep, and the world forgot the sound of the divine. But silence, like truth, never stays buried forever. The port of La Rochelle was shrouded in fog, thick and soundless, the kind that swallows both footsteps and memory. It was the night before the king's soldiers arrived, the final refuge of the Templars who had escaped arrest. In the harbour, a fleet of ships waited, their sails furled, their crews silent. No orders were shouted, no lights burned, only the creak of ropes and the rhythm of the tide broke the stillness. Among the cargo was a single chest, long and narrow, wrapped in linen and sealed with wax. Inside rested the lid of the ark, carved from acacia and gilded with gold leaf so thin it seemed to breathe when touched. Those who carried it said the linen was warm even in the cold sea air, as if the relic inside remembered sunlight. The Grand Commander overseeing the escape, a man named Geoffroy de Charny, stood on the pier with his hood drawn low. He had sworn to keep the relic from both crown and church. The plan was simple and desperate. The fleet would sail north under the fog, scattering into separate routes. Some ships would head towards Scotland, others to the Baltic, a few perhaps as far as the Western Isles. None would bear flags or names. They would vanish into legend before the sun rose. At midnight, the bell of the harbour struck once, and the ships began to move. The fog thickened, as if protecting them, swallowing masts and hulls until only the soft splash of oars remained. In the hold of the lead ship, the chest was tied to the keel with iron chains. The knights on board knelt around it, praying not for victory but for invisibility. The air grew heavy. One sailor claimed he heard a faint humming from below, a low vibration that made the timbers quiver. He said it was like the sound of bees trapped in honey, soft but alive. The commander told him to keep silent. By dawn, the harbour was empty. When the king's men arrived, they found only wet footprints and a few broken barrels. The fleet had vanished, as though swallowed by the sea. No wreckage ever surfaced. No survivors were recorded. But in the years that followed, rumours spread. Fishermen off the coast of Brittany spoke of ghostly sails appearing in fog, ships moving without wind. In Scotland, monks recorded the arrival of foreign knights bearing a chest that glowed faintly in moonlight. They built a chapel to hide it, its stones arranged in the pattern of a cross intersecting a star. The church called these stories blasphemy. The crown called them lies, but the people whispered otherwise. They said the ark had fled the continent, carried on ships that never returned. Some claimed it rests still beneath the cliffs of Roslin, others that it crossed the ocean to lands uncharted. Yet one detail remains constant in every version. Wherever the relic went, the air around it grew warm, and the sound of bees followed. A quiet reminder that what once sang in Jerusalem still hums somewhere beyond the fog. Roslin Chapel rises above the Scottish hills like a frozen song. Its walls seem alive with pattern and meaning, carved with such precision that every line feels intentional, every curve deliberate. Built in the 15th century by William Sinclair, it stands as a puzzle of faith and geometry. To the pilgrim, it is a church. To the musician, it is an instrument. And to those who still guard the legacy of the Templars, it is a score of stone, written to preserve a frequency too sacred for paper. Each column, arch, and vault corresponds to a note, forming a silent melody that has never been played in full. The legend says that when the fleet from La Rochelle vanished into the northern fog, one ship reached the coast of Scotland. On board were the knights who carried the ark's golden lid, still wrapped in linen that glowed faintly in moonlight. The Sinclairs were among the few nobles who offered them sanctuary. They built Roslin not merely as a chapel but as a vault, a resonance chamber designed to hold the relic safely. The carvings that cover its interior are not random. Musicians have mapped them, finding that the patterns above the arches match waveforms of sound. Some resemble the shapes formed by sand when struck by vibration, as if the builders had carved the echoes of music into stone. Inside the chapel, light falls in strange ways. On certain days, When the sun passes through the east window, the beams strike the pillars at exact intervals, casting shadows that move like notes across a scale. When singers perform within its walls, the acoustics create harmonics that seem to come from nowhere, tones that linger even after silence. It is said that these harmonics align perfectly with the ancient frequency once used to activate the ark. The brothers of the priory who still visit Rosslyn call it the vaulted note, the last surviving chord of the original covenant. Beneath the chapel lies a sealed chamber, untouched since the day it was built. No one has been allowed to open it, though ground instruments have detected a hollow space beneath the floor. Legends claim that within rests the lid of the ark, still radiating its invisible field, keeping the tone alive. Some say the chamber was designed to hold pitch, to resonate endlessly at the same frequency, preserving the balance once maintained by the Templars. A vibration held in stone. Visitors often report hearing a faint hum when standing in the chapel alone. Guides dismiss it as imagination or the wind in the pipes, but those who know the old stories smile. They say Rosslyn is still singing, waiting for the missing chord. The carvings, the vaults, the hidden chamber below, all are parts of a single unfinished composition. Somewhere, scattered across time and continents, are the other notes, the staves, the shell, the matrix, the voices that once united heaven and earth. And when they are brought together again, the chapel will not just echo with sound, it will awaken. History remembers kings, popes, and wars, but it forgets the quiet hands that kept the world from unravelling. After the Templars fell and their relics scattered, a new lineage took their place. Not an order of knights, but of caretakers. They called themselves nothing. They wore no marks and took no vows. Yet for centuries, they maintained what others had hidden. The world knows them only through fragments, a mason symbol carved beneath an altar, a monk's marginal note written in code, a child's song passed down without understanding. Together, they are remembered as the engineers of mercy. Their task was simple in word but impossible in weight. Protect the fragments of the ark, preserve the balance of the field. Where the knights had used geometry and iron, these new guardians used patience and craft. Masons rebuilt the chapels that had fallen, placing every stone by measure of vibration rather than sight. They said that when a wall was aligned correctly, it would ring faintly if struck. Monks tended to the remnants of the golden plating, polishing them with oil and wine while chanting tones that matched the field's lost frequency. Mothers, too, became part of the covenant. They carried the knowledge differently. They taught it as song. Across France and Portugal, there are lullabies that sound older than language. They speak of bees that hum beneath the earth, of angels who sleep in wooden boxes, of golden rain that falls when the heart is pure. Few realize these songs are maps written in sound, their melodies following the same intervals once carved into Rosslyn Chapel and Chartres Cathedral. A mother's whisper to a child was a code disguised as comfort. Some melodies were meant to awaken memory in those born to continue the guardianship. By the time they reached adulthood, they would hum the songs unconsciously, ensuring the tone never vanished from human breath. In abbeys across Europe, craftsmen laboured in secrecy. They repaired wooden casings, replaced decayed gold leaf, and measured alignment using pendulums made from meteorite fragments. None claimed ownership of the pieces they guarded. Each believed their fragment was only a part of a whole, and that one day the sound would call them back together. Their work was slow, passed from generation to generation, hidden within the rhythm of daily devotion. Every few centuries, one among them would rise, gifted with the ability to hear the hum directly. They called such people listeners. They did not preach or lead armies. They built, they tuned, they restored. When storms grew strange or plagues swept across lands, they said the field was faltering. The listeners gathered then, quietly repairing resonance before it collapsed completely. The engineers of mercy never claimed miracles. They understood that divinity lived not in thunder or flame, but in maintenance, in the constant effort to keep harmony from fading. And though their names are forgotten, their work remains. Every time a song soothes a child or a cathedral's choir trembles with light, their touch is there, invisible yet enduring, holding the world at tune. In the chill of a crypt beneath the streets of Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte paused. He had come not as a conqueror, but as a seeker, drawn by rumours older than the French throne. The air was thick with dust and the scent of centuries. Candles flickered against stone walls carved with symbols that whispered of a world hidden beneath history. He felt it first as a vibration, subtle and insistent, a low hum that seemed to move through the floor, the walls, and into his bones. It was not music, not sound, as ordinary people know it, but a resonance that pressed against memory. The hum seemed alive, as if the crypt itself was breathing, aware of the presence of a man who carried ambition as others carried their heart. Napoleon stepped carefully over broken tiles, his boots echoing in rhythm with the faint pulse beneath. He reached the centre of the chamber, where the light of a single candle fell across a golden lid resting on stone. The lid glimmered unnaturally, catching shadows as though it were attuned to something unseen. He knelt, not to pray but to listen, and for a moment the room filled with a vibration that hummed in his skull and chest, weaving into his mind a pattern both ancient and urgent. The hum spoke not in words, but in intensity, as if history itself were urging him to remember. He thought of crowns and sceptres, of the power he had taken by force, and for the first time he felt a weight beyond politics. The hum resonated with something older than kingship, something not given by coronation but inherited in secret and guarded in shadows. Napoleon understood then why the Templars had built, hidden, and scattered. They had protected a frequency, a living presence that no army could command. He felt the pulse echoing through his hands as he brushed against the gold, and for an instant he imagined it rising, calling out, and reshaping the world itself. When he left the crypt, the hum lingered in his thoughts. In the months that followed, he made decisions that puzzled his ministers and baffled Europe. His coronation in 1804 was no ordinary pageant. He chose bees, ancient symbols of immortality and kingship, to decorate his robe. Golden bees swarmed across his shoulders, his chest, and the hem of his garment. Some said he wanted to claim France's heritage, others that it was vanity. Yet to those who understand the whispers of history, Napoleon's choice was memory and invocation. He remembered the hum, the vibration of power that was not seized but preserved. The bees were not just decoration, but a signal, a living crown translated into gold and cloth. The sound would not be contained. It moved with him, haunting his dreams, whispering over campaigns, in the corridors of palaces and across battlefields. Historians note his fascination with relics, with emblems older than France itself. They do not hear the hum as he did. But for him, it was unmistakable, a call to recognize authority that was not earned in battle, but inherited through the quiet patience of guardians. In the hum, he touched the edge of something beyond empire, a secret rhythm that had survived centuries, carried by those who knew the world was built not only of stone and law, but of resonance, song, and hidden fidelity. In the shadowed halls of Rome, where marble columns seemed to lean closer to hear secrets, a clerk moved silently, carrying stacks of parchment and boxes labelled with misleading titles. He was known to few, recognized by none, and in the records, he was simply the archivist of no name. Each day, he crossed thresholds that echoed with history, the footsteps of popes and scholars pressed into stone over centuries. He understood that the archive was more than a repository of faith. It was a maze of memory and misdirection, designed to hide truths too potent for casual eyes. On a narrow mezzanine, he paused before a box marked Covenant Maintenance. To any ordinary observer, it might seem to hold liturgical cloth or ceremonial robes. The label was deliberate, a mask for something that vibrated quietly beneath human understanding. Inside, the box contained fragments of an inheritance, tools for preserving a secret lineage, and objects that carried resonance beyond the mundane. Every item was catalogued with exacting care, every slip of paper folded in a way that only the clerk understood. The numbering, the notation, the angles of storage, all encoded patterns of preservation. He filed nothing under everything, and everything under nothing. The archivist worked by intuition, guided by knowledge, passed down in whispers rather than instruction manuals. He knew which boxes were dangerous, which manuscripts could corrupt a mind unprepared to receive them. Some were simple records, yet others pulsed with coded histories, genealogies of bloodlines that traced back to moments of divine intersection. Every entry he made seemed ordinary on paper, but was layered with protection and deception. The Templars, the Priory, even obscure families of nobles had entrusted their fragments of legacy to vaults like this, and he honoured that trust without question. The air was always cool, scented faintly of old parchment, dust, and candle smoke. Lamps flickered as though aware of the significance in the clerk's hands. Outside, Rome moved in sunlit chaos, unaware of the quiet custodianship happening in stone chambers below. He occasionally glanced at the marble reliefs lining the walls, symbols of saints and martyrs, but for him, these were not merely religious icons. They were reminders of continuity, markers left to guide those trained to read them. A bee here, a star there, a spiral barely etched, small signals to those who knew what to see. The archivist never sought recognition. He did not seek glory or understanding. His task was simple yet impossible: to maintain the lineage in silence, to preserve a covenant unbroken by politics, war, or time. Records were written, erased, recoded, and sometimes moved entirely without trace. The world above remained unaware, history rewritten daily in invisible strokes. He understood the cost of failure, the weight of discovery, yet he persisted, methodical and patient, because the secret he protected was more than lineage. It was the echo of a hum, a resonance that carried authority, inheritance, and memory across centuries. In the quiet of evening, when the corridors were empty and the lamps burned low, he paused at the box again. His hands lingered on the lid. There was no rush, no urgency beyond vigilance. He closed the box and filed it under its misleading title, a line necessary to protect truth. Rome slept above, oblivious to the guardian beneath, and in that stillness, the covenant remained unbroken, preserved in silence, waiting for eyes that might one day understand. In the spring of 1938, a man in a grey uniform stepped off the train at the misty station of Ren-Leto. He carried a leather case, heavy with instruments that hummed faintly even before being unpacked. Unlike the pilgrims and scholars who had passed through the village for centuries, he did not pray, he measured. He listened. His name was recorded in documents later burned or hidden, but in the hills above the village, he was known simply as the Nazi who brought a tuning fork. The case contained devices unlike anything the locals had seen, metal rods of precise length, brass weights calibrated to a fraction of a gram, and a fork tuned to a note that seemed to vibrate with the stone beneath their feet. He set up in the ruins of an old commandery, where the Templars had once gathered in secret. As the sun fell and shadows stretched, he struck the fork. The sound lingered unnaturally, curling into the walls, the earth, and perhaps even the air itself. Rocks vibrated almost imperceptibly, a low hum, like a voice half remembered, and the trees outside trembled in response. His men recorded everything in notebooks, bound in black leather. They made sketches of the ruins, traced the angles of walls and pillars, and noted patterns that seemed to repeat in the geometry of the site. They believed they were uncovering a relic of power, a divine weapon, yet what they found was not gold or jewel, nor cup or crown. It was resonance. It was a force that sang without form, that responded to frequency and touch, not to worship or command. The low note of the fork revealed hidden alignments in stone and earth, patterns laid down centuries before in ways that science and superstition could only guess at. Each strike of the fork produced new anomalies. Candles in iron sconces bent slightly, tilting as if pulled by invisible hands. Dust lifted and swirled in quiet eddies, and a faint warmth seemed to pulse from the ground. The men whispered about miracles and curses, but the Nazi wrote only observations. His notes were meticulous, but he misunderstood what he observed. He sought dominion over a force that required understanding, not obedience. His black notebook, filled with calculations, sketches, and erroneous conclusions, he thought he could weaponize it, as he did every artifact or belief he touched. Outside, the villagers noticed changes. Their animals stirred restlessly at night. Some reported hearing low hums from the ground, vibrations that made sleep impossible. Children dreamed of bees and pillars that moved when unobserved. But the expedition did not care for myth or memory. They measured, struck, and calculated, believing in dominion and discovery. They never realized that resonance is not a possession, but a conversation, one that demanded care, patience, and secrecy. Weeks later, they packed their instruments and left. The black notebooks were carried away and later vanished into archives or were destroyed. Yet the vibrations remained, echoing in stone, soil, and the trees of Rennes-Larteau. They hummed for those who could listen, waiting for someone patient enough to hear the story correctly. The Nazi had learned nothing. The earth whispered truths he could not read, and the Templar legacy of resonance, the covenant of sound beneath stone, remained intact, hidden, and waiting. In the spring of 1793, in a city newly carved from forests and marshes, men in dark cloaks gathered around an unfinished hall. The air was thick with sawdust, stone dust, and the smell of tallow candles. They were masons, not the builders of houses alone, but custodians of knowledge older than the nation they now served. Today was no ordinary cornerstone ceremony. The stone they prepared to lower was not merely symbolic. Inside it, hidden from the uninitiated, was a core tuned to a resonance that traced back to Europe, to Templar halls and Rosslyn Chapel, to the hum beneath stone that had travelled through centuries. The lodge members chanted softly in unison. Their words were a blessing to the city, yet also an incantation, a careful calibration of pitch and weight. The sphere descended slowly, touching the earth, and the hall seemed to breathe. Vibrations carried through the timber beams, through the marble threshold, and even into the soil beneath the city streets. The novices watched in awe as elders adjusted the placement, tapping, striking, listening. Each small shift mattered, misaligned by a hair, and the harmony would falter, lost to centuries once more. George Washington himself attended. Though dressed in formal uniform, he understood the deeper purpose. The laying of this cornerstone was not about ceremony or public display. It was a tuning of the city itself, a calibration of resonance meant to carry intention across space and time. The sound was imperceptible to most, but the initiated felt it. It was a vibration that resonated with memory, with history, with something sacred that had crossed the ocean in secrecy and careful protection. The sphere was not alone. Around it, markers, lines in the floor, and hidden inscriptions, aligned with stars and solstices. The lodge had learned from European masons, from codes carried through maps and manuscripts, that alignment was everything. A single error could disrupt centuries of careful tuning. The city, a republic born of revolution, was being connected subtly to a deeper order, not through conquest, but through harmony, not through gold, but through sound. Observers marveled at the ceremony, unaware of its true import. The speeches, prayers, and the waving of banners were distractions, layers to mask the act of resonance. Children watched silently from the edges, sensing without understanding, their hearts catching the faint echo of the European hum. This was history being written not in ink, but in frequency, a secret that would persist quietly beneath public knowledge. When the final chord was struck, the hall seemed to sigh, a settling that was both audible and felt. The men withdrew, leaving the sphere embedded, the cornerstone of a city, aligned. And though the public record would call it a dedication to liberty, to nationhood, the lodge knew differently. They had carried the thread of the Ark's secret, across oceans, across centuries. The chord, once Templar, once European, now resonated in the heart of a new world. Waiting, silent, persistent, ready for those who could listen and understand. The year was 1621, and the world seemed ordinary above ground, yet beneath the surface, currents of something ancient flowed silently. From the Levant, a caravan moved cautiously under moonlight, carrying the shell of the ark wrapped in linen and cedar. The merchants and guides thought it was a relic, a curiosity, unaware that the shell itself hummed softly, singing in frequencies only the attentive could feel. Across the mountains of Iberia, another party transported the staves, carved from sacred trees, protected in secret compartments, within wagons that seemed ordinary to the untrained eye. These men had been instructed to speak of nothing, to trust no one, yet each step of their journey was guided by a vibration they could not name but instinctively followed. In the north, near frozen forests and rivers that reflected silver in the winter sun, a lone custodian bore the lid, gold-lined and weighty with hidden power. He had travelled for months, following coded maps delivered by a mentor who had once served in Parisian lodges, now long disbanded. The lid pulsed in his hands, a quiet insistence that it must meet its counterparts. It had no destination written on parchment, only a resonance that called it forward. Meanwhile, in a monastery hidden among cliffs and fog, the matrix rested. It was never spoken of by the monks, as if admitting its presence would break a sacred contract. The matrix vibrated faintly, its energy constrained within carved wood and metal filigree, waiting for the other three fragments to awaken it. None of the carriers knew each other, yet the song travelled ahead. In dreams, in moments of inexplicable intuition, each felt a pull toward a single convergence point. Letters disappeared, plans shifted, roads altered themselves in their minds. The shell from the Levant seemed to thrum in response to the matrix hidden in Iberia. The staves reacted when the lid moved through a northern pass, a subtle alignment of unseen forces that guided all four toward each other. The air itself seemed charged along the paths they travelled, brushes of wind carrying vibrations that made the hair on the back of the neck stand. By midsummer, when the sun hung high and long over valleys and rivers, the four trails converged in a remote clearing, surrounded by stone monoliths. No one could explain why this spot had been chosen, yet all instinctively knew it was right. The shell, the staves, the lid, and the matrix were placed in the centre, separated only by steps that felt predetermined. As soon as they approached, the air began to hum louder, not a simple sound, but a complex resonance, a song woven from centuries of guardianship, Templar vows, and whispered prayers. The carriers looked at one another for the first time, strangers bound by invisible cords. They understood nothing of what had brought them together, yet each felt a certainty, a recognition that went beyond reason. The song had been waiting, patient and persistent, for four hands to bring it back into alignment. The clearing itself seemed to respond, leaves quivering, water in nearby streams vibrating faintly, as if the earth itself remembered the frequency. In that moment, the four realized that they were not merely moving objects, they were instruments, conduits for something older than kings, older than empires, a song that had survived fire, exile, and secrecy to play once more. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the nave cloaked in shadows that seemed to breathe. The four carriers entered quietly, each carrying their fragment, and the stone floor beneath them hummed softly, as if acknowledging their presence. Candlelight flickered, yet none of the flames moved. The air was thick, expectant, and alive with a resonance older than memory. When they laid the shell, the staves, the lid, and the matrix upon the altar, the pieces did not touch. yet something between them awakened. A warmth, gentle and insistent, spread across the room. At first, the change was subtle. The wooden shell pulsed faintly in time with heartbeats. The staves vibrated as if whispering a language of sound, and the gold-lined lid shimmered without reflection. The matrix, enigmatic and quiet, radiated a presence that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. The nave itself seemed to inhale and exhale, as if the building had waited centuries for this reunion. Every stone, every carving, every worn bench and tapestry responded. Light appeared without flame, filling the space with a golden glow that made shadows dissolve into warmth. The room was illuminated from within, not by torches, but by the resonance of the objects themselves. Then the subtle miracles began. Wounds that had lingered for years, old burns, and scars of both body and spirit itched as though something inside had remembered, and then slowly closed. Not all at once, but with a pattern that felt orchestrated, a rhythm of mercy. The four carriers felt it too, aches and pains they had carried for decades fading, replaced with a profound awareness of something benevolent and patient. This was no magic, no power that could be forced or captured. It was a mercy, an acknowledgement from the frequency, a voice in silence that healed without words. No sound came, no lightning struck, no thunder shook the roof. Only the gentle hum that had travelled through centuries filled the space. It was the song of custodianship, of patience, of sacred guardianship preserved across millennia. They understood that the Ark had never been a weapon, never a prize. It was a vessel of mercy, a keeper of frequencies that balanced the world subtly, invisibly. This revelation made their limbs tremble, not with fear, but with the weight of understanding. The room, the objects, and the air itself were one, and yet no one could name it fully. Hours passed, though time had little meaning. The glow remained soft, the hum constant, a lullaby for the ages. When the four carriers finally rose to leave, they carried with them a silence, a memory, a secret that could not be spoken aloud. The nave returned to shadow, candles still unlit, yet something had changed permanently. The world outside remained unaware, yet the room retained a quiet knowledge, a resonance waiting patiently for the next convergence. Mercy had returned, without spectacle, without violence, without opening, and the Ark whispered its song to those who could listen. The four carriers departed the nave, one by one, leaving the fragments where they had been reunited. The glow that had filled the room faded gradually, as if the light itself respected the choice of those who watched and understood. Outside, the night was still, and the moon cast silver paths across the ancient stone streets. No one would know the events that had transpired inside, except those who had been chosen to witness them. The Ark, or what remained of its power, was never meant to be a trophy, never meant to be displayed or written about in chronicles. Its purpose was to exist in alignment with the world, not above it. Over the centuries, the fragments would be moved, hidden, and guarded. Each trail a testament to the careful stewardship of those who understood the true covenant. Some would enter monasteries, others private estates, some even beneath the floors of city halls where history would never look. The knowledge of how to maintain the field, to respect its harmonics, would pass quietly from teacher to student, parent to child, in whispers, lullabies, and subtle gestures. The Ark's ethics became its own language, coded in action rather than speech. Those who understood knew that to touch it with greed or violence would bring ruin, but to honour it with care, compassion, and restraint was to participate in a legacy far greater than kingship or conquest. Legends would form around the relic, stories of miracles, unexplained phenomena, and whispers of divine intervention. Some would dismiss them as folklore, others would speculate feverishly in dusty libraries or behind glowing screens. Yet, the truth remained simple and unembellished. Power without ethics was dangerous, but power tempered by responsibility could heal, could teach, could allow the world to breathe easier without anyone ever noticing. The Ark had never been about glory, domination, or even knowledge. It was about stewardship. It was about maintaining a resonance that had been entrusted to humanity and letting it flow quietly, invisibly, as it always had. The covenant was renewed with each generation of guardians, not by words carved in stone, but by the choices made each day. They would heal what could be healed, offer mercy when it was possible, and keep the harmony intact, all without ever claiming recognition. Some guardians would walk through cities, unaware of the significance of their actions. Others would spend their lives in secluded crypts or abbeys, teaching children songs that aligned with the field, polishing gold that no one would ever see, repairing wood that held vibrations older than history itself. Their lives were ordinary on the surface, extraordinary in purpose, and entirely devoted to the silent, enduring song of the Ark. And so the world continued to turn. Wars would rage, empires would rise and fall, civilizations would forget, and yet the covenant endured. It was not in the headlines, in battles, or in treasures, but in the ethics, in the quiet guardianship, in the breath of the earth itself. Those who understood the covenant knew that to guard, to tune, and to honor the Ark was to participate in a rhythm that had existed since the first stone was carved. And in this rhythm, the world could breathe easier. The Ark had never needed to be possessed. It only needed to be respected, and in that respect, its true power, eternal and merciful, lived on.